All right, well, we've arrived at learning experience number 3, how we're going to develop a plan to fulfill the Great Commission. I know that your hearts are right there. And we know that this is your bread and butter. So there's going to be a lot of prior learning that's going to come into this learning experience. But what we're trying to do in this video is to try to get you ready for the master assessment. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll begin to walk our way through this learning experience number 3. And again, what we're looking at in this one for the master assessment is developing your plan to fulfill the Great Commission. That's at the heart of this. And we know that that's at the heart of what you're doing, regardless of what your role is, that we're all trying to see the Great Commission fulfilled. So the next slide is really where you're going to focus for your master assessment. There's 4 things that you'll need to be conversant on or being able to talk about and being shown that you've implemented to be able to take the master assessment. And then when you're actually in the master assessment, you want to talk about these 4 things. So the very first thing you're going to want to provide when you're talking about, when you're doing learning experience number 3, is to provide a biblical basis for evangelism and discipleship. And what that means is you would walk your way really from Genesis through Revelation using specific stories or aspects of who God is and how God's working to talk about this. So for example, if I were to do this, I always begin in Genesis. And so God created the man and the woman in his image. That means that man and the woman represent God and his interests in the world. And God's interest in the world, he said, he put him in the garden. The garden was different than the rest of the world outside, even though it was a perfect world. And he wanted them to extend the borders of the garden, to extend, and what that means is that he's in the garden, so that means extend his influence in the world. And that's what we do when we do evangelism and discipleship, right? We're sharing Christ. We're wanting to see that that person moves from representing their own interests to representing God's interests, okay? And then you might move from there to looking at the fall of man, and that requires the need for the gospel. That man is now fallen. Then in Genesis 3:15, that we know that that the serpent's going to have his head crushed, but he's going to bruise the heel of the seed of the woman. And that really is pointing towards the fact that Jesus is going to come and he's going to die on the cross, but he's not going to stay dead. And therefore, that's the bruise on the heel. He's going to resurrect. But the serpent is going to be destroyed and one day thrown in the lake of fire. And then you'd move from that maybe to Abraham, and that God makes a covenant with him, that God wants relationship. And that's why we do evangelism, is we're asking people to respond to the work of God's Spirit, to have a relationship with God. And that you could say then that the Old Testament ends in failure, meaning that they didn't fulfill having a relationship with God. The sacrificial system wouldn't do that. And so they were waiting for something else. And after 400 years of silence, that silence is broken by John the Baptist, and he announces the coming of the Messiah, the Christ, the one who will save the world from their sin. And then you go through, and then you can go all the way through the book of Revelation and say, in the end, there will be a judgment. And either those who have received Christ, right, the seed of the woman, will be with God for eternity. Those who have rejected him are the seed of the serpent, and they will be thrown into the lake of fire, because that is what they deserve. And so that's how you would provide the biblical basis for evangelism and discipleship. And then the next one that we want you to be able to do is distinguish the difference between what is a program and what is a ministry. And so a program, simply put, it's an event. You do the event, and when the event's done, it's done. So for example, we might have this is happening at our church, that they have a ministry to military. And so what they do is they'll have an event, they invite people to come, and once that event's done, they just wait for the next event. But there's nothing that happens in between. Whereas a ministry would be really different. A ministry say, okay, we're going to have this event, but we need to do a lot of things to get ready for that event. We need to prepare those we know in our church who are going to be coming and inviting friends. Do you know how to share your testimony? Do you know how to share your faith? Then you invite. Here's how you can invite people. This is how you can bring them. And then we'll have the event. And this is what's going to happen at the event. We want you to know that. And we're going to give you an opportunity to share your faith with your friend or your testimony with your friend. And then at the end of the event, then there's going to be days and weeks that follow where you're going to be following up with those people that came. That turns it from a program, a one-time event, to something that happens before the actual event and then something that happens after. That's what we see in a ministry. Okay, and then the third thing is we want you to develop a personal ministry statement. And the ministry statement is really telling others why you exist. I exist to tell people about who Jesus is. And I want it, for me personally, I teach to change lives. I want to see the gift that God has given me in the area of teaching, to be able to take that, and when people receive that teaching, that their lives are changed, to become more like Jesus, which allows the world to see Jesus in them, which is then attractive. So when they introduce that person to Jesus through a gospel presentation, that they've already seen Jesus demonstrated in that person's life. And then the last thing we want you to do is develop a win, build, send ministry in your local context. Now we recognize that most of you have been doing this throughout your Campus Crusade for Christ career. So prior learning would definitely come in here, and we're not asking that you do that, but what we're saying is, are you currently doing that? Are you still desiring to win people for Christ, and that you're taking steps to do that? Are you still building people up in their faith? Are you part of a Bible study? Are you part of a church? Are you contributing? Are you serving in that church to help build people? And then finally, are you helping send? Are you helping to send those maybe in your church or maybe in your local context? And that can be as simple as, I'm helping this disciple to go out and to minister to his classmates. That would be part of that send. But in all four of these, not only do you have a history of doing it, but are you presently doing that? And so that's the focus for this learning experience. Number 3 is these 4 elements. When you feel like you are doing those and you're ready to go, they're in you know the things you need to know. That's the content. You are living those things out. That's the character. And that you are actually applying those in your context. That's the craft. Then ask your mentor team that you would like to do this, and then if they affirm that, then you go ahead and do it. And you just walk through with them what I just did during the master assessment. So that should get you ready. And I look forward to hearing how things go. Have a great time. Thanks.